Thank you very much. And just checking you can hear me okay?
We can.
Fantastic. If we could move to the next slide. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're dialing in. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much to the Sports Development Network for the invitation. So as you heard, the charity, we work across a wide range of stakeholders to harness sport and physical activity as tools to tackle crime, build safer, healthier, and more resilient communities. And we currently do that across the UK and Southeast Asia. Personally, I've been involved in criminal justice and sport for about 25 years. So luckily for me today, I'll be focusing on sport, crime prevention and systems change. And from my perspective, how the global structure has developed and how we at the Alliance of Sport have been playing our part. And I might also add that coming from a criminal justice background initially, I often look at where sport can play a greater role within the system. And then our focus that's developed is in how do we make those changes within the system that make the intentional use of sport and physical activity a must-have and not a nice-to-have? So to move the systems, when we think around systems change, there's many platforms and processes that need to align to make even the smallest shifts. However, that's not a reason for us to lose faith, but perhaps it makes us think about how we might work slightly differently. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've heard already, we know that sport is recognised as an SDG enabler, but unless it's aligned across government outcomes, it remains siloed in its practice. And obviously some of that work that's gone on around the UN action plans, Kazan action plan, really tried to help, really did pave the way for where sport and physical activity can play a greater role across different government departments and different policy areas. And within that, and you'll hear me talk about it shortly, within those systems, we need things like the policy anchors, shared measures, co-financing and learning loops to really sort of using Ology's analogy from go to that sports car into that sort of train. And that's where you'll hear me also share a little bit around how the work of United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime and the International Olympic Committee have kind of moved the dial over the last few years. We can move on again, please. Thank you. So to start with, then we talk about the mandate, I suppose the anchor, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC. It's the UN's lead agency for crime prevention and criminal justice. And effectively, they're like a custodian or co-custodian for key SDG 16 indicators. And I suppose then it's how they tie international crime prevention planning to the 2030 agenda and how progress is measured. We then think around sort of declarations and their role in the sort of political commitment. The UN Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice adopts high-level declarations. And for example, the Kyoto Declaration in 2021, that committed member states to advance prevention and justice towards the SDGs and task UNODC and the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice with follow-up and support. Moving on, then you have sort of resolutions and the guidance or the how-to. So the UN General Assembly and Crime CCPCJ, so the commission I just mentioned, resolutions translate the declaration into direction for national strategies, toolkits and frameworks, encouraging the inclusion of specific approaches and signaling what good practice looks like. And then you have things around the implementation and support. So from a UNODC perspective, and you can see a lot of it on their website, how they lead that process from convening expert groups, producing practical tools and curriculums like the Line Up, Live Up program, developing strategic partnerships like the one with IOC, and building national data and indicator capacity and support for governments to adopt, deliver, and report SDG-aligned results through crime prevention plans. So you can see there's a process in place, and there has been, I guess, it's been moving for around the role of sport and crime prevention and criminal justice for probably a good 5 or so years. And if I just move on to the next slide, please. And you can see there, and I hope you can read that all right. So it's from following on from some of that work I mentioned around the action plans. In December 2019, UNODC and the Thailand Institute of Justice, the TIJ, hosted an expert group meeting. That brought together a number of practitioners, policymakers from around the world, and it focused on integrating sport into youth crime prevention and criminal justice strategies. It was really around consolidating international good practice and exploring next steps. That then became a document, which in December 2020, December 2020, those findings in that document was presented at the 29th session of the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Just to note that that commission normally takes place in May, but due to COVID, it was pushed back to 2020. Then in March 2021, the Kyoto Declaration, the 14th UN Crime Congress, adopted the Declaration on Advancing Crime Prevention, Criminal Justice and the Rule of Law towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. In a way, that became the bridge, I guess, to link policy and practice. The declaration became a political roadmap. It guides UN member states and UNODC for the work that's to be undertaken over the next 5 years. It explicitly tied crime prevention and criminal justice reforms to the 2030 agenda, especially around SDG 16. And whilst the Kyoto Declaration is a high-level document, it really did acknowledge sport's contribution to empower young people and called for holistic, inclusive prevention approaches, whilst also focusing on the root causes and strategic partnerships. So I think this really sort of created the space for sport to be treated as a legitimate cross-government prevention tool. And then in January 2022, United Nations General Assembly resolution. It formally encouraged sport-based interventions in crime prevention and criminal justice strategies. Again, so you can see there that we're taking that sort of next level of commitment and providing a little bit more detail around how people or how member states can go about it. November 23 or 22 to 23, the IOC and the UNODC really built on their formal partnership, which started back in November 2021. To focus on combating corruption and crime initially within sport, to focus on to then developing to focus on things like more around joint theories of change and policy guides, of which Dr. Holly Collison-Randall from Loughborough University, I think, provided the sort of pen on that, did a lot of the work. And that now is known as SCORE, Sport Against Crime, Outreach, Resilience and Empowerment of At-Risk Youth. And if you sort of Google SCORE or the IOC UNODC SCORE program, you'll find a copy of it. It's available for download. We can share a link if it's needed. Then following year, so you could, again, it's how this process has been building over some time. In June 2024, the UN General Assembly held a high-level debate, I think it was in New York from memory, on crime prevention, development and sports. So you can see how that pathway has been developing, progressing over time from high level to more direction for member states, how the UNODC is developing its program. And then this year, the IOC at their summit in June launched the Southeast Asia Sport and Youth Crime Prevention Initiative, which is really an opportunity to bring that sort of policy and practice at scale and actually commit investment and delivery. If you'd like to move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just there, so some of the monumental shifts that we spoke about, building on some of that initial work around sport for development and peace. So that sponsorship from the Thailand Institute of Justice to host that initial expert group, you really need to have member states who want to drive those changes in policy, that are going to attend the congresses or the commissions and take it forwards and champion for that change in policy guidance. That partnership between UNODC and the IOC, almost to sort of operationalize the policy turn. The SCORE program, really the curriculums like Line Up and Live Up, real tools and toolkits and capacity building support to help countries adopt within their crime prevention plans and think about how they map to the SDG 16 and others. And then obviously more recently, the IOC's Olympism 365 strategy, which explicitly positions sport as an SDG enabler. And at the summit, 45 commitments across 68 organizations were announced, projected to mobilize $200 million in value, creating a real ecosystem for programs like the Sport and Youth Crime Prevention Initiative. If we can move on to the next one, please. Thank you. And then just really just to show the role that we've been playing along the Alliance. So the Alliance, based on previous delivery, both working within prisons, there's a charity around reducing reoffending through sport initially. We founded the Alliance in 2015, and it was really about how we bring sport and criminal justice stakeholders together. I'm not sure if that's, not sure if you can hear a bit of backlash. I hope that's all right on that. So we founded 2015 to real unite sport and criminal justice from government to policy and try and provide a bit more support for those delivering within that space. In 2019, I was fortunate to attend, and you can see the picture on there of Vongtep, who was in the middle there. Currently, at the time, he was with Thailand Institute of Justice and is now part of our team, which is great. But we were there to contribute to the expert group meeting on how, from our perspective, how to integrate sport in youth crime prevention and criminal justice strategies. Following that and the engagement of that event and some of the work and some of the stuff that we presented, we were fortunate then for the next few years to carry out two research projects with the Thailand Institute of Justice. The first one was an international study, which I carried out with Professor Rosie Meek, and the second one I led up by myself, which was around the role of sport and youth crime prevention in Southeast Asia. During that time, we were fortunate to provide support for Thai delegations attending the Crime Congress and engage in regional policy conversations. And we were help them think about what to push for, how to word things, how to shape things, what they were happy with, what they weren't happy with. And you'd be amazed at about a back and forth from different member states around what they're comfortable with, the level of commitment. So being able to sort of go through that process and provide support was absolutely brilliant. Um, we also were involved in shaping the SCORE program, supporting its development through expert group meetings and sharing effective practice. And obviously, most recently, we're really proud to say that we're coordinating the Sport and Youth Crime Prevention Initiative across Southeast Asia. And that will be operating across Laos PDR, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. We go to the next slide, please. Yeah, sorry, there we go. Thank you. And just to tell you a little bit about that, again, it really is an opportunity to put policy into practice, to drive things across four countries and hopefully create a framework that can scale across Southeast Asia. And the key parts of that program is around how we develop both national and Southeast Asia wide networks of cross-sector collaboration. So sport, justice, education, youth, UNODC, French government. How do we bring those sort of actors together so that we've got that platform to facilitate knowledge exchange, explore the learning, the insights, and think about how we can start scaling that up? We're investing in community-led sport-based holistic crime prevention projects, so proof of concept projects, investments. The window of applications has been closed, and we'll be making the announcement hopefully very soon. But our plan is hoping that we'll impact over 10,000 young people across those four countries. We'll be providing a training and capacity building for multi-agency professionals. And for us, it's really important that if we're trying to build those partnerships and that, I guess, that intersectionality is making sure that justice, education, youth, community, sport professionals are training and learning together, better understanding what each other has to do and how they can work together across the different levels or the different parts of the system. That community of practice, we've got conferences, virtual webinars, online knowledge sharing, all of those things are coming, and you heard it here first. 27th, 28th of November will be our inaugural Sport and Youth Crime Prevention Conference in Bangkok. And then finally, it's about how we really build on that evidence base. How do we advance that from policy research? We're building a Southeast Asia academic network so that we can truly find people to champion this and take it forwards. And then just to finish on the final slide. Thank you. And just some sort of observations really. And a lot of the stuff that we talk about in that policy progression and the development that goes on often looks in the global south. And it seems to be a bit of a disconnect when we look in sort of higher income contexts. So when we look at crime prevention through sport, many of the challenges are the same regardless of where you're delivering. We see siloed programs, fragmented and short-term funding, too many KPIs in pulling in different directions, and often weak cross-government data sharing. In other words, we're not set up as a system, but more of a system of systems all developed independently. And to support change, we need joint leadership from justice and sport. And this doesn't necessarily have to mean another layer of bureaucracy. From our experience, a co-owned governance spine, a light but firm structure can often be mobilized to provide some accountability, shared direction, and build momentum. Some of the practical mechanisms that could potentially be adopted to support the process and build a coalition of the willing. Things like simple charters or non-formal declarations that set out the roles, decision rights, data sharing agreements in alignment with SDGs. Agreements on minimum indicator sets that everyone can rally around, those common goals. Contacts with the justice system, reoffending rates, well-being, for example. And then crucially, building the capacity of people and organisations across different sectors on how to implement and use these shared frameworks. Finally, we sort of need to contextualize what already exists, and that's already been said today. And just, I guess, if I had one call to action to leave you all with, it'd be to stop treating sport, crime prevention, and criminal justice initiatives as side projects scattered across different departments. Let's build a coherent system with shared leadership, shared measures, and shared accountability. That's how we'll get beyond pilots and projects and make this work a must-have and not a nice-to-have. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.